Welcome to another episode with Wisdom on the Front Porch. And on my front porch is Kevin. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Ellis. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I love the work you do.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that. So tell us about your work and what you do.
Absolutely. So I'm an executive coach and founding partner at Leadership Reinvented, and we're an executive coaching, leadership coaching, HR advisory, and training firm. What we
Excuse
do is, we work with a lot of, we work everywhere from first level leaders to executive teams to boards. A lot of group dynamics is what we focus on. Leadership development. We take a very custom approach to our coaching and training and development programs where we combine our experience as former corporate executives and entrepreneurs, and as well as our experience as board certified counselors to really dig deeper into really what's happening with the organization. We take a very holistic system, really a system approach to really figure out where some of the root cause issues holding either our clients back or these teams back.
So how many people does a business usually have to work with you?
So usually, if we're talking, we've seen some very large boards, right? So we've worked in professional associations. Those can get very, very large. So those can be 25, 30. Ideally,
Okay.
we'd like to stay at a smaller group level. And so, in most boards are like 6 to 7 people, C-suite, right around that same area too as well. So we work with, even if it's a leadership team just kind of struggling or a team overall, if there's a really critical strategic initiative coming in. So we'll work with the team to kind of help to form them, get them, set their ground rules, and how do we get them to progress rapidly where they're not going back to, their forming or their storming levels. So we want to kind of progress them pretty quickly through these stages of group development to get them into that performing area. And that performing area is really what, I like to call this utopian team. It's a highly agile. It is self-regulating. It's very innovative. There's no, silos. There's no, really, it's what we posture is the very few teams ever get to this utopian performing level that is, like I said, highly agile and really what's true performing.
Wow. Wow. So let's say I'm coming to you. I've got a team of 6 people. We've got a big event coming up, and we're really struggling to just make it all cohesive. Is that something you would help with?
Yeah, those are probably our best ones, right? Because we kind of
Oh,
want to figure out what's been going on. I think we enjoy that the most because this is really, when we combine our counseling backgrounds and again, we're not counselors. I don't want to say that, but we just, we're board certified counselors, and so we like to kind of take that deeper approach. And so we really want to kind of talk through everyone and see where some of this conflict is coming from, or what's holding them back, what some of the root causes. It's a very normal for a team to go through stages of development. And that can look like infighting. That can look like a lot of conflict. And even individual members will want to kind of almost question authority, start to take, try to take on some authority. And that can present as a lot of different ways. What we would do is one, we'd want to work with the team as a whole. We're not interested in only working. We certainly can to help the leader to kind of build their own team dynamics, but especially in a situation like that, if there's a large project, whether it's a software, it's a transformation, it's a digital transformation program, we're going to look at that team as a whole and say, okay, how do we get back to basics? How do we move them from this initial stage of forming where nobody might know each other, or there's some impressions of what they might have from people, and have them set their own ground rules, have them set how they want to perform, how they want to communicate, what are the milestones, and build them up from that point to where we can start to get them into this higher level of collaboration where there's not conflict. How can they fix their own conflict? And how can they kind of build out their roadmap to grow to make the project successful? Very difficult. It's easier said than done. It takes some time. There's no doubt about it. But in a lot of coaching, it's a very we sometimes we'll take a very like psychoanalytic approach. Like we're going to look at this and say, okay, here's some of the roadblocks we're having, and so that's where we really would just want to progress people to get there for the most part.
wow, that sounds really amazing to be able to go through that because it sounds like you're not just helping them through this moment of conflict, but you're giving them tools so that they can handle the next conflict that comes up, because it will, you're working with people. People are going to have conflicts ever so often. So you're giving them something that they can use to, um, I don't want to say self-regulate, but manage themselves or handle the issue before it becomes a problem.
The group self-regulating is almost like where you start to get to that high level where
Oh, okay.
conflict is almost encouraged, right? As opposed to, and certainly this can happen in personal lives and professional lives where, if I feel like something happened and it wasn't, I might have taken this like a slight or I disagreed with it. And if that team doesn't speak up, that team's not performing. Right.
Right.
So if there is conflict or if I disagree, or if I'm not even just comfortable speaking in the meeting, I mean, innovation suffers, the team suffers, everybody kind of leaves the meeting saying, I don't know what I learned, I don't know why I
Mm,
was in this meeting. And that can really kind of progress into a very, not necessarily always a toxic culture, but it can start, and it can almost kind of have that ripple effect too, as well as, but if we can get them to a point where conflict is kind of encouraged a little bit, I say this a lot. Conflict is not always a negative. We've taken this term conflict as being a bad thing, but if I can go in and say I actually disagree with that, or what about if we look at it from this perspective, that's where we can kind of start to change that narrative, and the team can work together to solve their own issues. Where you don't need us, you don't need a coach to come in, you don't need a third party, and the team can, yeah, I mean, I feel really like that self-regulation. They can stop
yeah,
somebody and
yeah,
say, I thought we were planning on doing this way. And that's where the team can continue to grow and everyone feels safe. That's really the biggest thing too, as well. And that sounds a little contrived, but where everyone feels safe to be able to bring these things up and say, I don't know why I have to be in this meeting, or what is our goal? How do we know
right.
if we're being successful? So those are all conflict that, needs to be solved.
Yeah. I really like that. You can take that even if you only have yourself and maybe your spouse or your partner that is not a part of your business, but because they're in your household and affect everything you do too, there's a way to work with that too. So, yeah, learning that it's okay to disagree. Um, and I agree, this sounds kind of, simple, but we need to be able to feel safe to voice our opinion,
Mhm.
whether it's in our relationships or in the business world. Even with our clients, we need our clients to be able to feel safe enough with us to be able to
Absolutely.
say, I don't quite disagree with that, or I don't understand it. Because if you're just always telling them what to do and they have to go along with it, eventually they're going to like, okay, fine, this is nice, it's over. And then that's it. They're not going to refer you to anybody. They're not going to want to work with you again. So learning this conflict resolution, if I'm using the right words, um, even as a team, you can take that into other aspects of your life. So it's really a great thing that you're doing there. I know that I've heard other people talk about their business meetings that they were in and how they don't know why they keep having them. It's the same meeting over and over again. Nothing ever gets solved. And every time they bring up a solution, they get shut out or they get knocked down and nothing happens. In fact, that causes a lot of strife. And I've seen big corporations, even though big corporations are still going, they have all of this nitpicking and fighting and in-house conflict that doesn't really resolve anything. And eventually the company doesn't do so well. They get bought out by somebody else and things change. So what you're offering is excuse me, a solution that not only works for the company, but it also works for the individual within the company. And when
Yeah,
they each go to run their own little teams, they already have all the tools on how to make sure that it goes well. One
absolutely.
of the things in my community is I want people to feel safe. So if they have to be vulnerable, they know that it's okay, that it's not going to go any further, that they're going to be accepted in that vulnerability. So how did you get started in this? Is this something you've always been a part
Yeah,
of?
if I can, I'd love to circle back on your other point. I'd love to get there, but I loved you're right. That personal side is very important, right? And that's in we try not to separate the person from the professional, or we have to look at that person,
Okay.
right? That's a big thing. But even just, you're right. If you're in a corporate meeting or you're in a relationship and you don't feel comfortable, or if there's something you disagree with and you're not comfortable, eventually it's going to silence you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing that we understand, that leaders have to push for results. Leaders have to push their teams. Leaders have to
Right.
complete tasks, right? When we stay on this task only and we're just pushing and pushing and pushing, and if you're not noticing that your team's going quiet, that the innovation has suffered in your group, it's not that you've lost your team, but it's something that you need to kind of slow down on and almost pause and reflect on a little bit. Because again, even you're right, in large corporations, and I've worked with individuals in almost any company you can imagine, every field. Um, and I'll kind of get to where I started, in just a second, but
Okay.
things will still get done is the thing. Things are still getting done. Tasks are still getting completed, even in these groups, even in the leadership team. But if they're silent, they're not comfortable voicing their opinion, what is the point of having the team?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
especially if everyone's just agreeing or there's only the yes, yeah, yeah, and that's all you hear. You have a bunch of yes people there. It's not necessarily because they're yes people, it's because when they brought up concerns before, they brought up some strategic initiatives, or they brought up their ideas, it either fell on deaf ears or it just didn't go anywhere. So that's where
Right.
that can kind of fall into, and that does spread. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
just want to
Definitely.
circle back on
No,
that.
that was great.
How did I get into it? I came out of Um, it was in the army. I went there, that paid for my college. Completed school. I ended up getting into like a career coaching and resume writing business. And then I started my own, going back almost probably 20 years ago. And then so I've kind of built that business up, and that's where I really had this wonderful, very micro experience, right? So I'd work with individuals, and we built it up, did some outplacement stuff, a lot of presentations and things of that nature. But I really worked with individuals very deeply, getting into their careers and things of that nature. And you would hear all these stories, right? One thing I hear all the time, or my clients will say, if they're trying to drive initiative, they'll hear, "That's the way we've always done it." And to me, that's almost like the F word of corporate speak, where it's it's um, it's so awful for someone to hear that. That's the way we've always done it, even though it's not efficient, even though
Right.
it's not doing anything for us. So that's always a phrase. So I'd work with these individuals. We'd really get into their background. I'd hear their stories. I'd hear where maybe their struggles were as executives or individual contributors. Um, and so as I was doing that, and about my wife, who's also my partner in my firm now, she was growing up through corporate. She worked for a bunch of high level, she kind of grew up into, her last position was a chief transformation officer. And then we started this business together. We kind of thought about doing this a long time ago, because I would tell her, we kind of started running case studies together. So I would tell her about my clients, or she would tell me about her leadership teams, and we'd be working on it together, and kind of very much strategizing. Well, I think if we take this approach, or here's what I'm hearing, I think this might be one of the root causes. So we went to counseling school together. Got a master's degree in 2014. It's a very intensive process. It's like a 3-year program, lots of clinicals, internships, things of that nature. We had no intention of doing clinical mental health counseling. I really greatly respect that field, and actually really do admire counselors. I've struggled, probably, the thought of working with, heavy clinical, or children with, severe mental health diagnoses. I just don't know if I have the stomach for it. But
Mhm.
we really wanted to kind of, how do we translate this into our business world? And so that's kind of where how do we drive for deeper meaning? People would come to us and they'd have, yeah, it was professional. There's no doubt about it. It was the career. It was, I'm not, I don't have purpose. I'm not fulfilled, but everything should be fine. Boy, I hear that. I hear that a lot. Um, how do I work with them deeper? Because they would bring these personal things to us, but I wasn't skilled enough. I could tell you on the career side, or let's run some career assessments. And I just wasn't skilled enough to be able to kind of really feel like I was making a huge difference with them. And so, my wife would say the same thing. She's coaching these executives, and she's training these teams. And everyone's excited the first couple of days. Everyone's, "Oh, this is a great training," or "Thank you so much for that new idea. I'm going to implement this." And everyone comes out, and about a week later, everyone go right back to doing the exact same thing. And
Yeah.
so that's really, and again, that's real comments our mind trying to keep us in that same place. It's really a safety mechanism. how do we dig deeper? How are we able to protect our clients even better or get them to perform better? And that's really when we started about 2018, and we've been kind of full going at it. But even then, it was relatively slow. So we've kind of done a slow burn. But now we're both, really focused on kind of pushing this out. And yeah, it's great. I, I love I certainly, like I said, I have nothing but respect for the mental health field. But certainly when what I feel like that we do is our ripple effect of a good leadership, of a good executive team, of a good board, it impacts a lot of people, right? And so we
Mhm.
know that the workplaces today are the numbers are rough, stress levels are up, and people aren't thriving and they're miserable, but they can't leave because the job market's no good. But if we can develop a good team, right, or if they feel like they can go to a meeting and have an impact, there's purpose there, and that does impact them. That impacts them personally too as well. And so there's this beautiful ripple effect that again takes time. Once that trust is there, that purpose is there, and so that's really where that's the bottom line. This is why we get into it. So we feel like you can make that ripple impact and have more impact on other people's lives. And I know it sounds, maybe maybe a little overstated, but it really does matter. If you're
Yeah, yeah.
we've all got to be working, right? I mean, we don't all have to be, but if you're going to be working, you want to feel like there is purpose there. It's aligned to your values, and you're making a difference, even if it is as an IC or if it is as a first level manager.
Right.
But that does translate. But if you're stressed, if work is off, you feel bad at the office, you're not contributing, micromanage, that does translate to the home. There's no doubt about
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It just reminded me of the time when I was working at the factory, and you work on the line and you do the same thing over and over and over and repeat it, and
it.
and you don't really feel like you're doing your job, but for me personally, I wanted to do more. I wanted to contribute more. And so when I was able to move into the display department, I knew I was making a difference there. I knew that I was giving them the high quality that needed to be there for people to see these items because they were going to shows and whatnot. And it was
Sure.
wonderful because now I was leading a team that we're going to give our best. We're going to make these stand out to look like something more amazing than anything, not just, the normal humdrum. And you brought up a really good point that I had just recently discovered, be November, December of last year, is the starting out with something new. Wow, this is going to be really great. All those endorphins are going on in your mind. It's just like, this is so fantastic. And it's one of the things that as entrepreneurs, we get into the shiny object thing because, wow, this is really exciting. But doing the normal day-to-day task and waiting for things to happen can get slow and boring. And so we try something else because we want that big rush of endorphins and happiness again. And
Yeah.
and so instead of taking our time and going through the steps that need to be, we keep jumping from one thing to another. And so I like the way you're talking about bringing the team together, finding out what's really going on and giving them the steps and the ability to self-regulate and continue to go on and get it done. So by the time they finish this course with you, they still have that sense of fulfillment and we're going to get this done and I can carry this on into this and I can do this
Into another
now.
team. Yeah. Yeah. We don't want to
Yeah.
coach you forever. Yeah. We
No.
like, yeah, we you don't want us there all the time, right? Is the thing. So
No.
that's the other thing. But yeah, that will go to other teams, or that, here's where maybe we can build these expectations around there as we form, storm, and norm the groups.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Yeah, gosh, you brought up a lot of good things, and I like the way that you were working together and until you finally found the place that did work for you. So what are some of the things that, if you don't mind sharing, as we get into a team and we have a conflict, what are some of the things that we can do on our own, maybe before you come into our team and help us out? What are some things that we can look for that maybe we need to say, hey, this maybe is the problem here before we actually hire somebody to come in? We need to identify these first.
I think everyone has a responsibility when there's teams, right? And I think that's where, if it can be much more difficult if I'm 2 years out of school and I'm with this group and I've got a couple IT SMEs and I've got a software and then there's an outside consultant in there too as well, and then the executive stakeholders of VP or the leaders of VP or director. It can be difficult for a first level software engineer, and I'm just using technology, but that can be difficult for someone like that to speak up, but there is still a responsibility there, right? But number one, if you're forming before you have to come in, so say you are forming a team like that, it can be difficult, but especially for your audience, like if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm starting to ramp, starting to grow a little bit, and now I need a CFO and I need a COO or CSO. Okay, what do I need to do to them? How do I get them to start? How do I get us to start operating? And I think that's probably one of the first things that you do have to be a leader at that point, right? It's still a CFO's responsibility, right, to be part of this team and be like,
Right.
okay, what are we doing here? But let's figure out as a group, how do we work together? Or even an entrepreneur's bringing in a smaller team, right? And they're specialists, they're all ICs. Number one, what we really recommend is, okay, let's show some vulnerability. What do we have to do? Let's have open conversations. The first, if you're forming a group, and this is where definitely in corporate environments it can get difficult. And I kind of alluded to this, where a lot of companies, I don't feel, really very rarely ever get to that performing stage, that utopian stage, because again, people leave or a new consultant comes in. So what really has to work is almost like let's focus on the group. Let's get back to the basics. Okay, what do we expect? Let's have this open conversation, because we can't just start going into tasks. We can't just start going into this is your allocation. So really the importance of building the team, even though it's going to take time, right? And it's going to take a little bit of conflict. It's going to take a little bit of headway, and someone's going to try and jockey for authority. It's going to be a little painful on the front end, but it's going to pay off a million times. And that's really where the leader can kind of, all right, how do we form? Let's talk about our concerns. Let's talk about what do we want to see? How do we want to communicate? What are our expectations of communication? What are some of our goals? What's our plan for how we're going to handle conflict? Is it going to be there? So that's where it takes a little bit of time really on that front end. But if you want innovation, collaboration, productivity, efficiency with this group, and you want this group really being agile to kind of use everyone's diverse perspectives, which is really the ideal. Why else are you forming a team? You have to spend that time to kind of build that team and really get them all on the same page.
Yeah, that's really good. You mentioned about the young IT person coming in or engineer, whatever it is. And it reminded me of a situation, not that I was involved in, but I was, because people work from home, I get to hear some of these corporate conversations that go on. Um, and one was where you have this young person who has a little bit of experience, wanting to make an impact in the team, very headstrong. You've got a lot of strong personalities here. You have the experienced person who has gone through all the changes, who sees what's going on. You've got the young person who says, yeah, but we've got all these new innovations and everything coming on, and you're old, you don't know what you're doing. You've got the older person who's saying, the young kids are just, even though you're smart, you really don't have the knowledge that goes on with a whole system that's going on here. So you've got these two very strong-willed, very smart, intelligent people that butt heads against each other. And sometimes one goes behind the back of the other, and then it gets found out. You've got all these problems going on. So how do you handle or how do you advise, the strong-willed personalities to listen to each other, take the best from each other, be part of the team to work together? Um, and then I have another question after that.
Yeah, I mean, I started to even think like, okay, this is something we're looked at a lot now with the 2025 trends that are out there, right? And
Right.
Gallup and MIT's, and they've all got these trends, and that almost sounded like this multi-generational workforce. And so we've really looked at that, like, okay, how do we coach that? Because you do hear a lot of people saying that Gen Zs and baby boomers, and we've got up to 5 generations working in offices now too as well. If you've got multiple headstrong personalities, what's the point of the team then?
Yeah.
Aligned to their values, aligned to their purpose is the thing. So that's really
Okay.
where, yeah, there's going to be that conflict. And that's where you can't ignore that conflict because, yeah, if I've got a headstrong, whatever, 26-year-old, I don't know, Harvard grad, and I've got my CIO is also now leading this team and this 25. Yeah, how do they get to value each other then too as well? And that's where I started kind of thinking, yeah, we've been doing a lot of research on this multi-generational workforce. How do we get them? I think we have to get them to appreciate what everyone brings is number one too as well. Right. And you hear all these stories of Gen Z's this or Gen X is this and now, and I don't even know where all these generations came from. All of a sudden everyone's labeled, right?
Yeah.
And but I mean, but it's true. We do there is different values with a baby boomer versus a Gen X or a millennial, and
Hmm.
they've come up on technology different. And so I guess it looks to you kind of have to have some understanding of what their values is or how they prefer to work. And again, where we get back down to basics, that's instead of looking this as just this team of ICs that or my SMEs that we've all got to work together and let's start driving for results. Well, what does the Gen Z value? What is the baby boomer value, and how does Gen Z want to work? Does Gen Z likes texting? They don't want to have a meeting if they don't need to. But a baby boomer might look at that and might say, well, that's actually way too informal for me, and it feels a little disrespectful. And that's conflict. But if we
Yeah.
if we if we solve that, if we could just sit down and say, okay, how do we want to work? What do we expect? The headstrong thing, there's always going to be that headstrong, especially if you're talking expertise or you've been to the best school and this person didn't go to college at all and they've grown throughout the organization. But again, that's where we say, okay, well, let's dig a little deeper. What do you value? Do we think we're going to be successful? How do we bring that together and connect that to whether the team's larger purpose, excuse me, and values, the organization's larger purpose, and that's where you can start getting to work all together. Again, easier said than done. This is not a I go in for 20 minutes and poof, we've got a performing team. This takes a lot of work on everyone's part, including the facilitator. But sometimes that's why it is beneficial to bring in just someone who can help facilitate a conversation. What I hear you saying, Jim, what I hear you saying, Susan, and this isn't working and things of that nature. And do we feel we need this many meetings or whatever the case is, and let the team solve the problems themselves. We always say this, we don't have the answers. I'm never going to go in and say what is right for your business. I have no idea, but now let's figure
Right.
out how we can get that together.
Yeah. I was thinking about my uncle. He worked for the state. They, put the roads in and did the pavement and all of that. And I remember he was talking about this young man that came to work and he was getting closer to retirement and the young man made a mistake. My uncle had told him, he goes, I'm not your boss, but this is the way I think it would
Mhm.
be better for it to go and you'll have better results. And the young kid goes, no, I'm just going to do it the way that I thought I was supposed to do it. And it's like, okay, well, the main boss came in and said, what happened here? Why? Because it ended up becoming a mess. And he goes, what happened? And he goes, well, I did it this way. And he goes, well, did Leonard tell you how to do it? He goes, yeah, he told me what should have been done. He goes, well, why didn't you listen? Because he'd been there long enough. He knew how everything worked and how things were supposed to be done to
Sure.
where now I hear some of the conversations in some of the rooms. It's like when the one that, excuse me, is more experienced and has been there for a while says, I think this is the way it should be done, automatically gets shut out. Says, no, you can't do it that way. We're going to do it this way. So they go and do it and they make a mess of it. And then later it's like, I told you this is going to happen, that this is what it's supposed to do. And so
Mhm.
then, after all the problems arise, then they have to go, okay, well, what did you say we were supposed to do so we can fix it? Or someone else comes in and says, Well, he never said that. So they have to keep track of what they
Of
say. I mean, it can be very
course.
frustrating. So how do you, I guess that's another one of that generational thing coming in there. What is a way that if you find yourself in the position that you've got all these, to put it in words from when I was a kid, that those young whippersnappers that come in and want to do everything their way, how would you as a more experienced person that maybe is not in a position of authority, but you do have the knowledge and wisdom, how do you handle something like that to still let them have their voice be heard, but say, yes, that's really great, but this has been our experience in doing this, and this is why it doesn't work, without making them feel like you're bossing them around?
What'd you hire them for? Would be my first question. And I guess kind of getting to your story is there, even to your story, what was the point of him saying we're going to go, I'm going to do it this way regardless of how you said it? The leader might come in and say, well, and this could get back to what I said, this is the way we've always done it. This has always worked. And this very well could be a standard operating procedure. I'm not sure what we're
Right.
talking about, right? I mean, again, if this is how to do preventative maintenance on a manufacturing line, yeah, I'd follow that to a T. But if you've got someone else that comes in, they're 22, they're 25, headstrong, but they might have value, right? There might be new
Right.
ideas. And so I
Right.
think that's where, why don't we start getting back down to basics as opposed to, because that might be something this individual looks at and goes, well, actually, I think we might be able to do a little bit better this way. They've got to feel
Okay.
comfortable saying it. This individual just was like, no, I'm going to do it this way, and it blew up in his face. But on the
Right.
same note, the leader could have been like, okay, well, I hear what you're saying. Why? Tell me more about that. And that's where, we can start
Okay.
getting that value. And that's where I open going, well, why'd you hire him? Right. I mean, is it to just do the same thing? You can get a robot to do that,
Because
right?
everybody's
Well, this,
retiring. We need new people.
yeah, to have that, what about so innovation could suffer in that, and that young man might have been like, well, I did have this idea, but it was a mistake, or he didn't fully cultivate it, or they could have come up with, collaborated on what a better process could have been. So that's the thing. Yes, what I would say to your audience is, okay, you're bringing in these young kids, they do have new ideas. They do know how the world works in a sense, right? It's a lot different than how we all grew up. It's a lot different
Oh,
than how I
yeah.
grew up. How you grew up.
Yeah.
It's different, but that's not a bad thing necessarily. And you
Right.
you still got the final call, right? I mean, as a leader, you still got the final call. But how do we get them to feel comfortable coming to you and saying, actually, what if we did this? Or this doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't get this. Those are all great questions to ask. Tell me more about this. Look, this is difficult. And as a leader or an entrepreneur, or you're in the C-suite, you've got a million priorities, a million things coming at you all the time. And
Right.
it can sometimes be difficult to find that time to do it. But what happens if you don't? And I think there's one of the key things we always like to say is why are they there then? Is this going to be the same mold? Are you going to be left behind? Are you going to be, AT&T and T and all these other companies that refuse to innovate or refuse to kind of take that next step? You've got a great product, you've got a great team, use them.
Right.
And it's your responsibility to be like, how do they feel comfortable coming to you with a new process, a new idea, and collaborate together, to potentially find something new. Like I said, it may go back to exactly what you said you were going to do anyway. That's fine. But what about some new ideas? Never a bad thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really great. Yeah, I like the insight on all of that. Um, huh. Yeah, so how do people get a hold of you? Where do they find you at to help them out with their team?
Yeah, we're trying our marketing. We don't do great. So our website is leadership-reinvented.com. That's our main website, and then we do LinkedIn, of course. So they can just either find me or find the company on that end. We do a lot of blogs. Um, a lot of what we do, our marketing is really, I'm not selling anybody right now, right? And so
Right.
a lot of it is just information. We just did a live seminar, and we've got some,
Oh,
training
nice.
we're doing. But yeah, if we're speaking of technical issues, we had a little bit of technical issues, so we're working on that. But we just did a live with people asking questions and things of that nature. So and that was actually about the 2025 trends and like what people can do, and so and how to kind of manage those. So, but yeah, our website's probably the best, and we do a free consultation. Where we just kind of do a half hour, 45 minutes, and see if we can help you. because potentially it might not even be us, right? There might be something
Right.
else your team needs, but we would look at everything again very holistically, try some different modalities that just to kind of help get your team really to that next level. So,
That sounds really great. So do you have any closing thoughts for us?
um, there's a million things that are out there right now. I think, and certainly for your audience, with these trends that are coming, the workplace trends and this change, the multi-generational workforce, AI, the great detachment, which is like an engagement number that is ugly, all of these stress levels that seem to be increasing and the well-being initiative, the workplace is changing, but what we have to focus on, and it's a lot of what people say with AI, is we have to kind of start getting back to some of the basics and our soft skills and our empathy and what's called human centric leadership, which is going to be a little different than empathetic leadership, but really leading to the individual, what we're calling leading to complex emotions. Not that a leader is a counselor, but in probably what you've heard a lot is just let's get back to basics. Let's have the communication. Let's have the talk. You can't be wrong with me. Again, I want to know. I want to learn. Even as an executive, I want the feedback. There's the other thing we hear a lot is like, I'm sorry, I'm going down these crazy paths, but like, especially the higher up and higher up you get less and less feedback. And so you don't know,
Right.
but you also have to seek it out a little bit too as well. And your teams have to feel comfortable doing it, whether it's a VP or I mean, it might be a little unorthodox for a first year entry level client to come up to you and give you feedback, but I don't know, depends on the organization you're in. But again, it's a lot on just being open to that feedback and really exploring it. And as a leader, what's going on with everyone else too as well. So if I am pushing new initiative, if I am pushing my team very hard, I'm just going to tell them that I understand this is kind of a crazy time, and just to be able to slow down, don't respond from your without really pausing and kind of taking a breath to know, okay, where's this person coming from? So if you've got a new employee and they seem stressed out and they're always stressed out, and you're like, well, we used to work 14 hours a day. That's true, and that is certainly valid. We all did, right? But this person maybe never has had that experience, but they're still brilliant, and you hired them for a reason, and they do offer value, but they're coming from a different perspective of you, and that's different values from than you, different
Right.
work-life balance needs. And that's where sometimes, even as a leader or owner, it's good to kind of slow down and be like, okay, what does this person need? Difficult, again, easier said than done, but that's going to help your team grow as opposed to getting them stuck, having them just go in the corner and searching on, LinkedIn looking for their next job because they're miserable because they're not valued.
Right. So I have a question for you, and maybe this is unfair to ask you. But I was reading one of John Maxwell's books, and he talks about as a leader, you are training the person who's going to take over for you. And so you train this person, and then this person is trained. Now they're going to train the next person, but you're there with them. You're not actually going to train the third person. Well, it'd be the second person then, I guess. I don't know. You're the first, second, third. But you're going to be there to help them if there's any situations arise that maybe they didn't quite know how to handle. So that when you're gone, this second person automatically goes into your place and is helping this third person now train the fourth person. So, do you agree with that? Is that a good way to do it? That as a leader, you're there not to look over their shoulder, but to guide them and help them to do what you're doing to get the job done. Would that be something that would help eliminate a lot of conflict?
I guess I certainly get that point, right? I mean, and I think I've said it before. You're always looking, you're developing your replacement, right? You're leading to your replacement, but
Okay.
again, it's so you can take more of a strategic approach. You're building your team so they can operate if you've got a different meeting. You're trying
Okay.
to optimize
Right.
your time the most and optimize um, you optimize your team, get their value up, right? And I think and yeah, some of that value is being able to take over your responsibility and potentially your role. I do feel like that is eventually the responsibility of the leader. If they've got 50 people, you got 50 people vying for the role, but yeah, ideally, they're developing where they can operate in your stead.
Okay.
100%.
That's really great. Thank you. Yeah, and if you have any questions or comments or audience, for Kevin, get a hold of him. What are some of the social media sites that they can get a hold of you, Kevin?
Right now it's just LinkedIn. Yeah,
LinkedIn.
so we're
That's
kind of
good. Keep
focusing
it
on LinkedIn.
simple.
Yeah, yeah, sure, absolutely. And then
Yeah.
yeah, our courses, we're trying to expand some of the courses and things of that nature, especially as we see some of these trends. But yeah, for the most part, yeah, it's LinkedIn and our website is best for us. So and our blog.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. And be sure to check out Wisdom on the Front Porch for a link to this podcast and share it with others. You can see the magazines that's there. We now have the first issue out. It's free to everybody who looks on there, so you can see what's going on with the magazine, but you can subscribe for the other magazines coming up. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being here, and thank you, our audience, for being here. We really appreciate you.
So,
Remember,
thank you.
there's something wonderful that's going to happen, so be sure and keep your eyes open for it.
That was a lot of fun. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on Wisdom on the Front Porch with your host, Ellis Kirkpatrick. You can find us on our website, wisdomonthefrontporch.com, see previous episodes of the podcast, and view issues of the magazine. Did you know you can submit questions, leave reviews, or suggest topics? You can also tell us where your favorite front porch location is and what it means to you. We hope you gain value and insight from today's or previous talks. We appreciate your support for us so we can continue to provide value and expertise to you and others. Subscribe to Wisdom on the Front Porch magazine and join in next week when we bring you another great insight into the world of entrepreneur culture and lifestyle. Make today a great day. Always believe that something wonderful is going to happen.